And we are live. Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of the Box and One podcast. I think this is our first episode. If you guys believe it or not, this is our first one in 3 months. I don't know if you guys realize that. But I'm Ron Salgado, joined by Azam Faruqi and Pramit Bose. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Fred VanVleet's All-Star selection. Big news. Also, we're going to talk about the Raptors' 127-120 win against the Bulls. And at the end, if you stick around, I think we can talk a little bit about baseball since it's been a long time since we've talked any baseball. I think our last episode was actually baseball, but I mean it's been 3 months, so we can talk about where we're at with some of the negotiations. So before we move any further, play the intro. All right, guys. So as I mentioned, Fred VanVleet named an All-Star reserve today. Any surprises? Did you guys think he was actually going to end up getting voted, or did you guys think he was going to be like a quote unquote snub?
I thought he was going to get it. Absolutely. He's so well respected around the league. He plays so hard on defense. I think I don't know if he leads the league in total minutes, but he leads the league in minutes per game, which is respected by a lot of coaches in the era of load management. So respected by players. The analytics stand up. I mean, he plays D. I know, like LaMelo Ball, I think he ended up being snubbed, right? LaMelo.
Yeah, that was the big one. That one, Jaylen Brown. Who was the other name? There was a big man that I think was on that list of snubs. I can't remember who it was, but yeah.
I mean, I know that win shares isn't the be all end all, but Fred VanVleet has coming to tonight had a 5.3 win share. LaMelo Ball had 3.9. Like, LaMelo Ball is fantastic and could end up being a star, but he doesn't play the D that Fred brings. Like, I think even like with guys like, for example, like Chris Paul going to the NBA Finals last year, with like the respect that, although people tend to forget that what Lowry's doing in Miami, he did here all these years, but they're acting as if he's like a breakout player now down there. But I think there is a newfound sort of respect for that traditional point guard, point god, or whatever you want to call them, and Fred fits that mold. So the leadership qualities, the challenges the team has had this year. So yeah, he deserved to be there, and good on the league for sending him there.
I had a slight inkling that he was going to get snubbed, which, I mean, it would have been too bad. I don't know that it necessarily would be the worst thing because he's been playing so many minutes, and I thought the rest would have been nice. But I mean, when you look at his career progression, he went from being undrafted to, in 2017, a G League champion, 2019 an NBA champion, 2021 most points scored by an undrafted player, which was that 56 point game, and then 2022 NBA All-Star. The Raptors are 4 games above 500, which that's another thing that I don't think anybody really thought they were going to be that good. And Fred VanVleet is obviously a huge part of it. And I think he's averaging like 38 minutes. Is it still 38 minutes a game?
Oh yeah, about there. Yeah, just about. Maybe higher after tonight, but
yeah, it's like and we can get onto that because I think, like, congratulations to Fred. I mean, there's also the Pascal snub, which I mean, Kevin Durant is still going to be. I don't think he's playing, so there's still the potential that Pascal can get on there.
Well, yeah, it'll be Jared Allen. Jared Allen was snubbed in a big way. I think Allen deserves to go.
Yeah. I mean, I would love for it to be Pascal, but like at the same time, I don't know that it would necessarily be fair for the Raptors to get 2 guys on there. I don't think they've been that good. Although, if they have Pascal for the full season, who knows where they are record wise. And I think that's probably the one thing that holds Pascal back. It's the fact that, he missed, what was it, a month?
He missed the first month, and then he wasn't very good in November. if you recall, like he took off, he really started getting comfortable the first week of December. So it took him a while to get. So he's had 2 really good months. The defense is back. He's turned into a very good playmaker, very good post player. The shooting is better. 3-point shooting is better than it was last year. And he's shooting less, which I think is good. He's only going for high percentage looks now. He's not. Last year, I felt he took too many. That will never be his game. He'll be an adequate shooter, but I don't think he's an elite shooter by any stretch. So,
yeah, and I definitely recall the struggles because I think that was around the last time that we had an episode, mid-November. It was right around when the Raptors started to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
They were, I think, 2 games under 500 with a game to go against the Jazz, which they looked pretty. I think they looked pretty lost offensively that game, and Pascal was a big part of that. And I remember having conversations between me, you, and Azam where we were saying like he doesn't look like he knows what's going on. He doesn't look like he's up to speed. And this is at the time when like Twitter was just pounding on him. And it's funny because I've been like on our Twitter account. And if you don't follow us at Boxing One Pod. I keep asking the question now, where are all the Pascal haters? Because there were so many at that time. And they've like, this agree or disagree. This has to be the best he's played in his career.
Yeah, I think so also because there is a much more like when he made the All-Star team before the pandemic, he had a lot. He didn't have to be like the anchor that he is now. I mean, he had like a Gasol, he had Serge, he had Kyle, he had other like leadership around him. He had Norm who could score a lot. He didn't have to take on as big a load as he is right now. So yeah, I'm comparing his stats to the All-Star year. Obviously, some of the numbers are skewed a little because he was pretty bad in those regular season bubble games. But I'm just looking at the traditional stats. His field goal percentage is higher, although funnily enough, he took more shots, had more field goal attempts in 2020 than in 2022, even though there were more options around him. So he's a higher field goal percentage. The 3-point percentage is lower, but he's taking fewer threes. So he's shooting over 50% on twos. This is not including tonight. The assist numbers, he was at 3.5 assists a game of the All-Star season. He's at 5.1 assists a game now. The rebound numbers are up. Block numbers about the same. Steals are up. Points per game down a little bit. He's not his free throw shooting isn't as quite at the level it was.
I think that's the big difference too. I think if you look at the free throw percentage, I think he's down like 8%. He was hovering around 80% in that year, wasn't he?
792. So just under 80. And then last year he was over 80. People forget even though he was last year was considered a disappointing year. It was his best free throw shooting season of his career. So he's doing well. I mean, and again, some of these numbers for this year are skewed because of the fact that like he had a pretty inconsistent November, and he's a lot smarter. He reads the game well on offense. Like he knows when to pass. He knows he's quick to make that decision. Okay, the double team is coming. I'm moving the ball. Like he's just really come into his own. Like there's a difference when you're and you can't quantify it, but when you're scoring points, but you're not necessarily in control of the game. Now he's in control of the game. Like he controls the tempo, the pace, everything goes through him. Whereas I think before a lot of like he relied more on his athleticism, the spin move that the league started to obviously figure out. So he's added many more elements to his game. So and again, hard to quantify, but like 2 players can average 21 points a game. But it's one thing just to like have the ball, like just run the floor, have somebody pass through the ball and get an easy layup versus now like the ball, you hold onto the ball, the play goes through you, you create your own shot versus passing it out of double teams. So that's the difference between him 2 years ago and what he is now.
Yeah, I think we started to see a little bit of it. And I remember John Hollinger writing an article about him where he was starting to, and it was really early in the season. I think it was like 8 games in, but we started to see like what he is doing now. But I think what most people remember is how bad he was in the bubble last year, which was just a disaster. And everybody loves to joke about that spin move, which at that time seemed to be his only move, and he didn't have a counter. But he's really started to look up. And Azam, just to fill you in where we're at, since you got disconnected, some technical difficulties there. We're just talking about Pascal and the snub, but I think we haven't talked about the game yet. So let's talk about the 127-120 win against the Chicago Bulls today. So that puts us, or I say us as if I'm on that team. I'm not on the team, obviously, but it puts the Raptors 4 games above 500. Azam, how did you expect this?
Honestly, not a whole lot. I would have been happy if we were probably hovering or just flirting with 500 right about this time. Probably looking at the record, I would probably think I would have been happy with like a 22-28 record after 50 games, or especially with how Pascal was playing last year again. Obviously played a big role, but I'm surprised. I really didn't think this would have, they would have been this good, this deep into the season.
I'm not okay. They're a little bit. I had them between 38 and 44 games this season, and they're a little bit above. I think they're on pace for about 44 and a half or 45 wins now. I think the way, I think the way that they've gotten there, it's been a little bit chaotic. Like, I expected them to have a backup point guard with Dragic. I expected Boucher to not have been so bad the first 2.5 months or the first 2 months of the season. We didn't expect. I mean, we knew it'd take time for Pascal to work his way back, but I didn't think he'd be as bad as he was at times in November either. So, like, and they've lost some games they should have won. They've won games they probably should have. Like, how do you lose to Detroit one night and then you go in to play Milwaukee with Giannis and beat them?
Yeah.
And a fairly, like, it was not a blowout, but it was a decisive win. It wasn't like, oh, they just got lucky or one guy got hurt. Like, and they've beaten some good teams recently. Now, these good teams haven't been at full strength either. But then again, the Raptors lost a few games early on when they weren't at full strength. So balances. I don't have.
But they also won a few games in December where they were playing better teams who were sort of injury plagued a little bit, right?
Yeah, they did.
At the beginning of, like, when they're starting to get on a bit of a run.
Yeah, they did. Like, they've beaten Milwaukee twice without Giannis, but then they kind of validated those wins by beating them with Giannis. I mean, they've beaten Miami twice without Kyle Lowry, but Miami still on paper, even without Lowry, on paper is a better team than Toronto. Tonight's Bulls win, they had their top guys, but they didn't have Caruso and Ball and some of their supporting players. So, but again, they've had a lot of these issues too. They haven't had their full team together. Like, they've had what? It's something like 9 games with Trent, Siakam, VanVleet, OG, and Scotty. It's it's something like ridiculously so.
I mean, they had the 905 playing at one point, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's that one like Cleveland game, which is just a joke. Like, I think their most experienced guy on the floor was Utah, but
So can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Wait, sorry, I'm on lag sometimes. It's just kind of weird. So knowing what we know, so we've seen Pascal improve. One, how much do you guys think that's real? Because it's been probably about we're going on to a couple of months now, not more than that. But also with all the COVID issues, teams have played some wonky lineups here and there. What do you actually make of the season? Do we actually really know who truly the best teams are?
No, I think like the narrative of the season has been like every team has had to deal with playing other teams who weren't at full strength. So I don't know, and I could be wrong because I haven't looked at all the lineups. I haven't looked at all the games. I don't have enough time to do that. But like honestly, every team at one point was hit hard by the health and safety protocols. So at some point, a top team was playing another potentially top team without a full strength lineup. So I don't know that we still have a good sense of where the teams are. I think overall, like when you look at some of the teams, you look at the Phillies, you look at Milwaukee's, the Suns, who the good teams are. But I think where it really differs is maybe the 6 to 10 range, the play-in teams or the ones that are just borderline play-in. I think that's where, there might be some question of how good some of these teams are. And I honestly, like, as a Raptors fan, it pains me to say this, but I think the Raptors might fall in that bucket a little bit because we had the benefit of playing the Hawks recently without Trey, the Bucks at one point without Giannis, the Heat a couple times without Kyle. Yeah, we were in the same boat at one time too, playing with like awful lineups. But I mean, to be honest with you, we still don't know best lineup against best lineup how good we actually stack up. But the one thing that I will say is on the Pascal question, this is absolutely real. Like Pramit and I know Pramit, you've said many times you've got tired of defending him, but you still knew that there was something there for whatever reason. We didn't know what it was. He just couldn't put it together, and now all of a sudden, it's all rounding out, and like he's looking in top form.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing people forget. Look at what he was when they drafted him, and look at what he got to in a short period of time. You don't get to that level if you are a scrub or you're not that good. And there is still that misconception in the NBA that just because you get the max deal, that makes you a top 10 player. It does not. It's the economics of the league that a lot of people still tend to forget. Yeah, okay, if you're when you get paid, there is that higher expectation on you, and rightfully so. And he started off fine, and then he hit, I don't know what happened during the first, when the season was suspended at the beginning of the pandemic, and then the bubble, and last year he got off to a pretty bad start, but overall, like, he was better in the second half, and then he got hit with COVID, but then he still ended up okay. Not a great season, not what you'd expect, but it wasn't the disaster that when you look at the overall stats, what people would have thought he was averaging 15 and like shooting less than 40%, but he wasn't that bad. But it's real. He's figured it out. He trains in the Rico Hines camp, which is a very highly respected player development league. He has the work ethic. He's gotten to a level that he should have gotten to, and now he's just they're back home. They're in a good, even though they don't have fans, there's still a normalcy to the season again, which I think appears to be a guy that thrives on a normal routine. So yeah, it's real. And he's, like I said, there's a difference when you're scoring a lot, but guys are creating for you, and you have like a couple of go-to moves, or you run the floor and you just outrun everybody and get an easy layup, versus like creating a shot, right? And that's sustainable. Like that's how for example, that's how the Raptors beat the Bucks, because outside of Giannis, like, they had a bunch of great shooters around them, but they couldn't put the ball on the floor and create their own shot or make plays. And the Raptors took advantage of that and beat them. So he's evolved into that kind of offensive player.
Yeah, and what I will say, if you really want to know about the evolution of Pascal, while we're still on the Pascal topic, if you haven't listened to JJ Redick's podcast, Old Man in the Three, with Pascal on there, listen to it, watch it on YouTube. Just like when he talks about how he got into basketball, how he progressed from high school into college, into the NBA, like there's just something about the guy. Like he just has something about him where he just picks things up and is able to excel. I don't know what it is, but anybody who can pick up the game at 15, and even for the first year where he played it like a couple weeks a year, to be able to make it to the NBA and play at a high level at the NBA, not just be in the NBA. Like he's a super impressive guy, and that's why I've always continued to root for him. It's his story that I love, but also just he's such a unique player. You saw what he was able to do against Miami in that OT game. That back-to-back blocks against was I think it was against Bam Adebayo. Like he just does things that athletically other big men can't necessarily do. Yeah, there's a handful, and I think he is like the expectations are really contract based, which like you said, Prime, it's kind of crazy because like you think about it, there's max contract pretty much means that maybe you're like a top 40 to 60 player in the league, like in some cases, because every team gets a couple of max contracts really if you look at it.
Yep. And remember, even though he had the bubble games which skewed his number towards the negative, he still was second team All NBA that year. So people forget that, and he's better now than he was then, with less depth on the team as well. So he's doing it with
exactly.
much greater emphasis on him than what there would have been.
Yeah. So another guy that I want to talk about, and he didn't have, so he had 5 straight games with 30 plus points, but he had, so it's Garey Trent Jr. He had 16, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Still a very good contribution. But I just want to ask, looking forward, I think this trade deadline we pretty much know who the main piece is. You want to make a move on Dragic. But looking at Garey Trent Jr. in the future, what's your outlook for him? Like, do you guys think his ceiling is all-star level? Is this a guy that the Raptors want to invest heavily in? I know Raptors fans love him, but just from a dollars and cents perspective, is this a guy that you want to sink some money into, especially with some of the contracts that you're gonna have to pay out in the coming years?
I don't know. You have to see. I want to see him in a playoff round. I think that's where you'll learn. When the defenses are amped up, when you're playing higher quality competition, when teams are game planning, everybody gets game planned for, and teams are just taking away things that you're good at. Like he's able to get away with his pull-up mid-range, which is very good, by the way. But they're going to take that away from him now. So now that said, we have a very good coaching staff who will be able to get him to the right places. But I don't think we can't judge anything yet because, again, it's been a very wonky, chaotic year. I think the team would like to see what he does in a playoff round before they go ahead and make that call.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's any urgency to do anything this deadline with him, right? Again, yes, you're doing well and you might want to progress, but still a bit of a development year. So why not just run with him for the whole year? If you are in the playoffs, see a round or two, see how he reacts to adjustments, and maybe you'll know better.
Yeah, and definitely not. I mean, I doubt they would do anything this deadline. And I'm just looking forward because I think a lot of people talk about his contract and they say it's a 3-year deal when in reality he only has another year after this because that third year is an option year.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way he's taking that option because if he keeps doing what he's doing right now, you look at it, he's opting out and he's going to go get paid. And when you look at, we're going to have to pay Scotty in a few years. You're going to have to pay Fred. I feel like Fred is up in a couple years as well. So you'll have Pascal with a significant contract. If you have to pay Garey Trent, you're going to have Gary. You're going to have it's just at some point it's going to become a situation like the Suns where, the Suns don't want to pay DeAndre Ayton the max contract that he wanted because, the Suns have a bunch of players who are playing at a high level.
Fred's up at the same time, so he has a player option after next year.
There you go.
So they're gonna have to hand
They're
Fred.
not going to hand over 2 deals, right, in the same year.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, maybe Trent gets you. Maybe you just have to wait and see who the next star is that's available. That could end up being like these are assets, right? These are these deals are assets. I think the plan is just see what the core is all about, and then set themselves up for deals. Like they can the team, while they don't have like a ton of cap space for free agency, they're very well set up for matching salaries and trade. Although I think the draft pick pool is a bit light. Like they haven't stockpiled picks the way other orgs have, but then those other orgs are going to have a lot of difficulty doing salary matching. So it goes both ways. But yeah, they'll wait for the big deal. Maybe Giannis wants out of Milwaukee. Yeah,
and in that case, you got a couple contracts that you can throw in there. I mean, I think they still have to figure out. We've talked about this in our group chat as well. It's OG. Where does he end up? Right? What does he end up becoming? Sure, he's still a lockdown defender, but I think there's still a lot to be desired when you look at his offensive game. I'm not saying, and like anybody watching or listening, like we're not saying you have to make moves right now. We're like definitely not. But at some point, you're going to have decisions to make with how well all these guys are playing. And to be honest with you, that's a great problem to have.
Yep.
Right now, yeah, and right now, all you really have to do is worry about that Dragic contract, because I mean, really, that becomes, do you trade it, or if no trade, then you have to buy him out.
If you can't do a deal, I would say just buy out, right?
Oh yeah, he's gonna get bought. If they don't move him next week, they're buying him out. I think there's no question.
There's no other option there, basically.
That was always I'm sure that was always the agreement when they sent him home. It was like he's like he'll accept the buyout, but they want to get far enough along into the year where he gets most of that money, and then he can sign on with the contender. That contract is an asset, so they have a lot. Now, word is that there is a lot of interest around the league, and Doug Smith reported that the Raptors expect to have a deal for him with that contract. Now, what they get back, I don't know, because this has been you follow NBA writers on Twitter. This has been a very quiet in terms of rumors. Like, you don't really know a lot of who's out there. You've heard like Rashawn Holmes. There's the Dragic deal. I mean, there's obviously talk about like John Wall or Westbrook. That rumor's out there, but I don't. It's been rumor-wise, it's been very quiet. I don't know. Maybe it's because like a lot of teams have to deal with all dealing with COVID and players being out and protocols. That that was the focus of their time. There hasn't been enough emphasis put on the trade market. A lot of teams with so many injured guys that teams haven't quite gotten a read on who they are yet. But they got a week to figure it out now.
Yeah, and maybe they're spending too much time worrying about Ben Simmons, because that's all I've heard about pretty much. That's been the one like constant since the start of the season. It's been, where does Ben Simmons end up?
Remember Simmons for Siakam was actually rumored, and people talked about that as like, oh my God, the Raptors should give it a shot.
Yeah, crazy. Like everybody's like, you have to do that. Why wouldn't you do that? And it's like, no, Pascal is like, they talk about Simmons being a unique player. Pascal is just as unique, just in a very different way. And he can shoot, right? Which, imagine Simmons on this team. Like, imagine like there would be almost zero spacing.
Well, Simmons wouldn't be. I would put Simmons at center in a small lineup.
Yeah. I mean, that's always been the best. I think the best utilization of Simmons' skills.
When you can utilize him in that manner.
Yeah.
Like if teams are, and ironically, I use the example of Philly. I mean, I don't think putting him against Embiid at center is the right decision, especially because Embiid will probably want to murder him down there when they play each other.
And so the other guy that I want to talk about, because I've been super impressed, and I know he was a whipping boy near the beginning of the season, is Chris Boucher, who like since mid to late December has like completely transformed his game. I think he went from being a guy who thought every time he got the ball he had to put up a shot to now realizing his role really is defend, offensive rebounds, and that's another thing, guys. Like the offensive rebounding on this team gets me so excited when you see like three pairs of arms in the key all grabbing for that ball, and you know somebody's getting a hand on it. And Chris Boucher he's like today he had 16 and 10. I don't know how many offensive boards he had, but he's been a beast lately. And they mentioned it on the broadcast, and Primate, you mentioned this before. Watching the Dennis Rodman tapes has to help.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Dennis Rodman was not the biggest guy. He was strong, but he wasn't like your classic 7-footer. And yeah, Boucher
5 and
December in 24 minutes, averaged 7.8 rebounds. January averaging about 25, 46 a game, 7 rebounds. With a very good number. So yeah, he's come around. Now, I think he's going to be traded. And this is nothing like this isn't like, oh, Boucher hate or anything like that. It's that he's what does he have, an option? Is it a team option or player option for next year?
I think it might be a team option if I'm not mistaken, but I'd have to check.
Yeah, we should check that actually. So
but it is a very movable contract. And I actually asked about that today on that sports business classroom seminar that I was telling you guys about, and like they didn't answer it, but I'm really curious to see like what the interest is.
Actually, let me there is no option for next year. He's a UFA according to Spot Track.
So I think he's definitely candidate to be moved.
He's a UFA. I'm just confirming on Hoops Hype. Yeah, he's a UFA, and so I mean, again, I don't know what I mean. Usually, when Masai and Bobby are quiet, it means that something's going to happen. When there's always rumors about them, that it ends up being a little disappointing. Like last year's deadline, we all thought Lowry was gone, and they didn't do anything, but they moved Norm, and which turned out to be a steal. And they made the smaller deals with Terrence Davis and Matt Thomas. Again, he's playing really. I mean, Boucher is playing very well. A lot of teams would find value in a player like him. He's a very good role player. Again, if there is a guy available, and I don't know who is, but like if they can fill out that center position, if they can get a very good guard, and he's part of that package, you have to consider it. And I love the way he plays, but it's going to be very difficult again with a cap system to retain him when we just talked about the Trent situation and the other guys for next year.
Yeah, as much as I would hate to see Boucher go, I think like that contract would be very movable to get an asset back. We talked about the Pirtle possibility. Not that I don't think the Spurs would actually want that, but I think we were just looking at dollar for dollar what would make most sense, and we came up with like the Malachi and Boucher for Pirtle because that works out great for the Raptors. And these are the types of trades that I think are always thrown out there on those Fan 590 call-in shows whenever they're talking about the Jays. It's like throw out our worst guys to get in exchange for the best guys from somewhere else.
Ryan Goins for Mike Trout, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, the cap. Yeah, they don't have any bad contracts on the books. Like there isn't a deal that they have where I'm like, oh God, what the hell? We need to offload this. I mean, I guess maybe Kem Birch, if I had to pick a bad contract that they have, and that's not even really bad. It's very movable, and it is an asset. But like he's making $6 million and hasn't really. I mean, he's been hurt a lot, but he hasn't really provided much this year. But again, it is movable. Like if it's part of a package, if they are trying to land the big fish, it's a movable deal for sure. But we don't have any albatrosses. Let's put it that way.
No, they did a really good job of kind of positioning themselves, because if you look at their contract situation, it's everything is around like $7-8 million and below, and then you have those like 3 contracts which are around 20-23 million, and then Pascal's, which is the big one. So like it's if they ever need to create some space, they can with some deals. And then you got that Dragic one, obviously, which is the 20 million, which...
And even and the guys that have the biggest deals are guys that other teams would want because they're playing very well.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we're good shape contract-wise.
Yeah, and just to look back at what we said, I think to round off this Raptors discussion, I remember at the beginning of the season we said if they're at 500 headed into the All-Star break, we're happy because we felt that they would be a second half team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's looking really promising right now. If you look at their stats over the past 2 weeks, in both offensive rating and defensive rating, as per Cleaning the Glass, they're I think 9th in offense and 11th in defense. So the defense has really improved, and that was the one area where they were like low 20s for most of the season. And I think you've seen it over the past few weeks. They've gotten so much better.
Yep, absolutely. And again, they're playing better competition as well. Even though those teams may not have had their full rosters, they've still had very good, or it's not like they're fielding. You still have like two All-Stars tonight and Vucevic, even though again they didn't have Caruso and Ball. So it's a work in progress, but they're making good progress. I'm not gonna say like, oh, they're top 4, they have that potential. No, they're not there yet. They need the bench is a problem. The minutes, like they don't have a lot of depth outside of their guys. That's why like when one of those guys goes down, it just becomes very chaotic. That's why you've had games where you may have like they didn't play well in that OKC game I attended in December, even though they had most of their guys there, but like you didn't have Precious. And then while he could be cringeworthy on offense, he's very good on defense. And he's
been a lot better offensively though. If you look recently,
he's improving. But there are times where like those hands are awful. Like today there was a game in the second quarter, he makes a really good move, puts up a floater, and it just looks so bad. And he was open, and it just looked so bad coming out of his hand, and it was a complete miss.
That's not the one that he airballed, is it?
No, he didn't airball it. It hit the rim, but it just like you couldn't have had a more high percentage shot for a player with his like a 6'9" guy in the paint, where he just managed to get free of his defender, had plenty of space, and all he had to do was just float it up, and it just looks just so. I don't know. It's like, when you watch a pitcher in baseball and just know they got when they're throwing and there's just no velocity, no movement, there's nothing.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like when the ball comes out of his hand. They have to work. He has to work on that. But again, it's the development year. So just try not to get too high or too low about anything.
There was another one of those where he came in off the wing, drove it in, and I think he had like a little half, like a baby hook. And it looked like it was either a shot. If it was a shot, it was the worst miss I've ever seen. But Pascal was also under the basket, so it may have been a shot that he kind of turned into a pass. But if it was a shot, it was one of the worst misses I've ever seen. All right, so I think that's a good spot to end off the Raptors discussion. One of the things that I really want to get to, because I'm completely lost with what's going on, and we talked about the Blue Jays and some of the moves that they were making a while ago, but obviously there's been a little bit of a holdup. So can you guys fill me in on what the deal is with the MLB and the work stoppage in general?
So for the longest of time, there really wasn't any movement going on since the lockout. Recently, things have started to gain some traction. The league came out with a proposal. I think the PA countered as well. They're, f- I don't want to say they're further along. I don't still see, we're going to have season's probably not going to start on time. But there are definitely some areas where you can see that there could be some convergence. There are some areas that are, both sides are still wide apart. Um, League has made it known that there's certain areas that are no-go areas they don't want to discuss. So, for example, um, I think I think reducing free agency. So for Jays fans, that would have had an impact because you would have lost 1 year of Bo and Vlad. So it seems like that's a no-go area for the league. That's not really going to happen. The other thing that they're really not big on is changing the Super Two eligibility. For those who are not aware, this is basically so generally when players come up, they have 6 full years of control if they come up on opening day as rookies. They generally hit arbitration, I think, after 2 years. If they go past the certain date, that sort of changes every month, every year. Then they're eligible after this third. Like it's something wonky like that. Pramit, I don't know. You can probably explain that better. But other than that, the good news is there has they're not as far apart on rookie salary. So league minimum, I think it's a $200,000 difference, which I think is still ludicrous. I think this is where I think I would fault the league fault the PA more than the league because they'll always come with something low. I don't think the league should have like the PA, sorry, should have even can't come up with like 775,000. I think 28% of all pitches I think were thrown by rookies last year. You're getting a lot of surplus value. You might not see that in WAR or something like that, and you might see that a lot of it has to do with the fact that there might be relievers. A lot of them, kids might come up or 4A guys coming up throwing a game here and there to give regular pitchers a day's rest. Yes, we know all of that, but at the end of the day, that all accounted for 28% of the workload, right? And you can't have 28% of people making that little salary. So again, it goes back to they want more dollar value in free agency. I get why you want to do that. But I mean, Scotty Barnes is making $7 million in his rookie year, right? I mean, Vlad made $500,000. The value that Vlad provided to MLB, forget the Blue Jays, is exponentially more than what Scotty's gonna like. And Scotty's having a great year, right?
Yeah.
So again, sure, Vladdy wasn't a rookie, but I mean, the point being, he's still like making probably 10 times less than what it is in NBA. So again, I think there's still some fundamental issues with how PA approaches things, and I think that's challenging. I don't see a lot of coverage around that. My opinions are slightly more contrary and different. I think PA is to blame as much as the league for this state we're in today because PA really doesn't look out for up and coming kids as much as probably they should.
Is there one main sticking point, or is it just like a bunch of things?
There are a bunch of things, right? So the PA definitely wanted either an age-based free agency or reduce the number of years of control. They wanted again the arbitration date to change. They do want to tie. They want to relook at the draft a little bit. It seems like the league has shown a little bit of openness to that, although it's funny how they're agreeing to it as well. It's like if we don't follow, then we should get a draft pick as a reward. But that's the one. But the thing that the league is huge on is they want an expanded playoff, and I think this is probably the biggest chip that the PA could play with because that is something the league wants at all costs. Obviously, there are more eyes during the playoffs. There's more money in the pot. There are a lot of benefits to it.
PA though is concerned because, like, let's say for example, you're a team that's in a mid-80s win team, and you missed the playoffs, but you said, "Hey, we're very close. Let's go out and spend money." if we have and get a couple of players. Where the PA is concerned is that if more teams are getting in, owners will be less incentivized to spend money to get in because it'll be so much easier to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So their concern is that owners will pocket more revenue and then spend less money as a result of that, because it's like, let's say the Jays had gotten in this year with 91 wins, as they should have, and they didn't. Rogers could say, hey, you know what? We don't need, we could, Semien and Ray left. Well, we don't need to replace. We could still, if we fall to 80-something wins, we could still probably get in with the development of our young guys. We don't need to give you the money to get Gosman. So it's a little, so as exciting as it could potentially be, I mean, there's pros and cons to it. There is a concern from the CA.
So that's a fair concern, but it goes both ways, right? It cuts both ways. So you also have teams who are probably at around 84, 85 wins. And like, if we spend a little, if we get a Semien type of a player, of a Ray, we're in that conversation. We might want to go, we might want to pull the
trigger. If you're at 84, 85 wins and you think you can get in
with 88, you will spend.
You may not even need 88 if you expand. Maybe 85 is enough.
That's true.
And then it's, and everybody says baseball playoffs are the biggest crapshoot there is. So owners can just say, hey, we don't need 88. We can get in with 85.
Have they said how much they want to expand it by? Is it like just an extra couple of teams, or like, do they want to do like a play-in type of thing, like they did? Was it the that was shortened COVID year, like that type of thing? Or
I think it's similar to that. From what I'm not totally familiar with it. I've only just read details, but I think it would be something similar to that COVID year. But that was, I think they liked it. I mean, it was a 60-game season. You had to do it. So it was a completely different. And you had no fans, and you needed to make up that extra revenue and get those extra games. But no, I see the pros and cons to it. There's a lot of fans that have wanted an expanded playoff. I've never been big on it because you're already at 162 games. Like, it's one thing with these other leagues when you have 82 games and you have to have those extra games to get that revenue in because you can't play every day. And just the more games you have, the bigger sample size, you'll be able to differentiate the truly elite teams from just like mid-tier teams, right? Like, when you have 82 games, you could have 2 really hot months and then be trashed for 4 months and still make the playoffs and not do anything. So this year was a bit of an anomaly because it really went down to literally the last inning of the last game of the season to settle the playoffs. But there were a lot of good teams, and with more teams getting in, we could have more weekends like that. But on the flip side is that you've already had 6 months where you've played pretty much every day. Most of the time you'll know.
So, you know what the funny thing that I find about this whole thing is that, like, being a soccer fan, the season itself is the most important thing. I mean, MLS aside, MLS is different. It's very North American based, but in Europe, winning the season is what's most important, and it doesn't cheapen the work that you do throughout the course of the entire season. Here, for whatever reason, we place so much importance on the playoffs, and I get it. The playoffs are a lot more fun because it's like higher stakes, but like, baseball is already such a long season. You've done your work over 162 games, and what you're saying is that means even less now because we're letting more teams into the playoffs.
So you're right. So there's a lot to unpack what you guys just said, and I agree with you almost 99% of what you're saying. So first of all, what I think MLB's proposal is 7 teams. So you have, so the idea is 7 from each league make the playoffs. So it's a 14-team playoff, not 16 like other groups. What you basically do is you have the best team with the best record have a bye, and then the other remaining 2 division winners and the top wild card, they host wild card series. and then you have 3 teams progressing, and you have 4, and then move on. And in an ideal world, for the very longest of time, I was of the opinion that the length of a baseball season has a certain integrity to it, and it really differentiates good team from the bad, and you don't want to dilute the value of a good season, right?
Yeah.
Like an 80 win team beating a 93 win team. Like even this year, like 200 win teams played a one-off game, right? Giants and the Dodgers. But there are a few things to consider. So one is that this is not solving the problem. What's happening is once you know you're not making the playoffs, it's out of your reach, you are tanking.
Good point.
And that tank nation, it's not 1, 2, 3 teams. It's like a lot of teams that start to tank because very soon you figure out you're not going to make the playoffs, right? Okay, last year was an anomaly in both leagues. Lots of 90 game winners, right? Like it was like really crazy. But even if you look at the 2019 season, you had like 4 or 5 teams in the AL that won 55 games or less than 60 games. So it wasn't. It doesn't make for a good sport either, right? Because now you have to watch these teams 162 times a year as well. So that's one. The second is the economics, the reality of economics, the world we live in. Less eyeballs in a regular season game, more eyeballs in a playoff game, which means you do need to bring that revenue, which is important. And thirdly, the thing about soccer, which is what I love, is there's something to play for starters. There's no playoffs in the league itself, right?
Yeah.
So the top teams, you have slots for the Champions League, so you obviously try to win the money in the league, and you make to Europe. The next spot goes to the Europa, and then you're also battling to avoid relegation as well. So
That's the big difference. It's that relegation that makes it different.
Exactly. So it's the middling teams that kind of sometimes figure out what do we want to do? Do we want to put our resources on the League Cups and all those, knockoff competitions and try and gain some trophies? And so it keeps it interesting throughout. The only true knockout competitions in soccer are the Champions League or the Europa.
Yeah.
Where again, we've heard conversations. Teams want to increase the pools. We've seen bigger clubs now wanting to have a slightly more guarantee, so they want to increase the spots because very soon we're going to have Newcastle as a regular appearance, so that's going to be at the expense of either a Man U or a Liverpool or someone, right? Newcastle in 5 years is probably going to have the highest payroll in the world, like by a massive distance. So I mean, these things. So in the playoff format, these things do come up in Europe as well. But I think that's the reality. That yes, the length of the season is important, but how do you avoid tanking? Like, I'm a bit of a radical on the draft. I would actually penalize for tanking. You like the top 10 picks should be protected. Bottom 5 record, you don't get this is stupid.
You could put
it's
that
unrealistic, but you have to put some.
I agree that you need to disincentivize it. I still believe even with expanded playoffs, teams would still tank. It just the period in which a team tanks, it may not go on as long. But I mean, and I'm not defending tanking here, but if you look at the teams that have tanked in recent history that are in decent sized markets, there was a period of they did follow with spending after the fact. Whether we whether we enjoyed the tank period or not, like case in point, the Jays. They bottomed out in 2019 and they took that team and they pretty much started a tank job once they finally gave up that old core. They tanked from mid 2018 and 2019, and then 2020, I mean, they got in, but it's a 60-game season. They probably wouldn't have gotten in had it been with that roster over 162 games, and they probably would have tanked that year as well before going into free agency to spend. But most teams that did go through prolonged tanking did end up at some point spending money in free agency.
Unless you're the Marlins.
Or Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Prolonged tanking in the Marlins case.
Houston has spent, and even though we hate them, they spent Philly did a tank. I mean, Houston popularized it. I mean, they were like the first team to truly exploit tanking.
But Phillies was more strategic, because Phillies is generally a big market.
Yeah, and then they went.
But there are a lot of smaller
and then they
markets
went
that
and they
don't do
spent
that.
Harper, Wheeler, Toronto, Detroit. Tigers are starting to. I mean, they did the Baez deal, right? So that's the start of it. They were in. They could still be in on Correa when the lockout ends. The Cubs, when they did their tank, and then they spent a lot. So the only way to really, the economics are so screwed up in baseball, because the truth is, when guys get to free agency such a late age, that the back end of those deals are going to be bad. So unless you strike early, or you just have a consistent good flow of younger players coming in, 2 years from now, we're probably going to be thinking, okay, how do the Jays offload George Springer?
But I mean, to be honest with you though, like I don't know that any league has actually figured it out, because even like as screwed up as the economics in baseball might be, the NBA never figured it out. Like they tried to change it with the weighting of the lottery, but people still tank, not to the level of Philly, mind you, but like.
Yeah, because the NBA, it's all about the impact of a player. Like if you get into that lottery where it's if you can get an impact player, that can turn your franchise around quickly. Different. I mean, I really believe that if league minimums were higher, but then the existing players will say, well, we didn't get the league minimum. Now here's our chance to get paid, and we're not going to get paid. So it's a very complicated situation.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. In 2009, it won't show up in the payroll, but Steven Strasburg signed $15 million.
Yeah.
Like when he was selected in the draft, because the draft slots were mere recommendations. Teams could go as high as they want. So 15 million made sense for a number one draft pick. The fact that now we have hard caps makes this thing even worse. Like remember the 2010 draft that Blue Jay fans love to talk about, but how they manipulated the system. They were signing guys for hot dogs at the end just to save the $5,000 and go up.
That was 2012.
2012,
2010 was the older rules.
The older rules, yeah, you're right. So the Sanchez, Syndergaard, Nicolino, when they were signing those guys. So I mean, in all honesty, and teams will always manipulate. You'll never have a foolproof system, right? But what do you want to do? You want to structurally improve the system in a way that you're protecting. So if you know that the free agency is a no-no, you can reduce that. You know you're going to go there at the later. Why not try to get more out up front?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I don't know. I agree with that 100%. That and especially now the way that we now know, like back in the day. I mean, now we value defense. We can quantify defense and base running a lot more effectively. And even if a young player comes up, I mean, other than the elite stars, even then, the Vlad struggled his first couple of years. Teams will say, well, they're struggling. But now that we know for a fact that even a below average offensive player can still be a very positive overall contributor to the team if they're able to defend and run the bases fairly well, because if they couldn't do any of those things, they wouldn't get the call up. Then they should be paid more, because even a below average hitter making 500,000 could be much more valuable than a good free agent signing, good player for 8-9 million. That's 31 years old. It's tough, because I can even understand from the perspective of the players. Like if I'm a 31-year-old player now and I'm in free agency, or let's just say I took a deal that bought out a few years of my free agency, and I'm thinking that I'm going to get to free agency at age 33, where I have a chance even if it's a shorter term, I have a chance at a big payday. But if I see all these other young guys coming up and all of a sudden getting their pays bumped, that will impact my free agency payday, because I had to work my way through the old system and was underpaid in the early parts of my career. So I'm now in a position to fight for myself. It's so complicated. Hence why, and I think the owners take a lot of advantage of the union because I'm sure the union has a ton of infighting with this, a ton of it.
Can I ask you guys a question? Why aren't let's say Latin American prospects? Why aren't they subject to go through the draft? Why is it a separate process for them rather than like in the NBA? Like, you know, Europeans go through the draft.
Well, they put Puerto Rico into the draft, and that's been very bad for Puerto Rican players because they don't have the infrastructure. So you could watch a high school player in a proper
The
league.
evaluation becomes difficult, right?
It's much easier to evaluate a high school player. They're in a league. They're being coached. They're playing in games. There's an infrastructure in place. There are travel teams. There's showcases. You get enough looks at guys, in college even more so. In Latin America, it doesn't work like that. Like, you don't have proper leagues. It goes through the Buscones.
But yeah, but like you still have like it's Giannis was a gamble.
But it's going to kill them because nobody's going to draft those guys because they're going to fall out. They're not going to get paid because they're going to say that how can we draft these? We're not going to pay them. We're not going to. We have a limited pool of resources to spend in a draft. Just like what happened to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rican baseball got decimated because they got put in the draft. That's why you don't have a lot of Puerto Ricans in the league now.
Could they not do like a Latin American only draft and still have it be subject to the draft order? I'm just thinking because, like, if you think about it, like you see who a lot of these players are signing with. They're like, you know, there are certain teams who are going to have a higher profile in Latin America just because they see them on TV all the time. Yeah. Yankees, for instance. Yankees will always be the Yankees. Dodgers will always be the Dodgers. They're always going to be. I don't know how the Dodgers do in Latin America, to be honest with you. But
Blue Jays are huge in Latin America.
Yeah. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it feels like an unfair advantage to a team who's already big, is already rich, and now you're giving them
not really, because it's really just who devotes the resources to it and who knows the system and who knows all the key players and who can get to these guys and who knows how to deal with the handlers.
I'm thinking about those top players. Like, you know, there's always a handful of like those top players.
I mean, the Blue Jays weren't necessarily the top tier team.
Fair enough.
It's not like teams got like Oakland got Cespedes, remember?
Yeah.
Like out of Cuba, a little different, but I don't think it's
very different.
I don't know the numbers as to who spends most in Latin America, but I let's put it this way: like, obviously, there are still limits. First of all, so it's not like the Yankees and the Dodgers can just go crazy and just blow everybody out of the water.
I'm just thinking in terms of profile, right?
It's still a bit like there are certain teams like Baltimore didn't even go down there until like Baltimore just in the last 2 years have started building their Latin American infrastructure, and that's going to take them a long time to get up to speed. There's still limits, so it's not like one rich team can just buy everybody, right? There's still limited money, but it's just a different process. And I think unless you're going to invest in having proper leagues set up for these kids from a young age and a proper system at the grassroots level, and then once you've invested that money and gotten to, then maybe in 5-6 years you do a draft, you're going to kill Latin American baseball.
You know what you just said right now is the best idea, because of what they should do. And I know we're running a little long now, but what they should do is similar to what the NBA has done in Africa. Set up, and it'll be a little bit different because you're going to be targeting younger kids, but set up an official league, structure it, you know, as a regional league, and then you have like a national tournament. But this way, and this way, it looks less like you're exploiting these kids and then just casting them aside, because you can actually teach them things, you know, have an educational component to it. I don't know what it would cost. And I don't know if the MLB has any appetite to do that, but really,
then you'd have to also remember the African players end up at some point they'll make their way to the States and play in college here, or they'll play in Europe. They'll get into the leagues where that are scouted. So you're going to have to still get those players like into like junior colleges or high schools. To get
if I'm not mistaken, I think there was a proposal as part of this CBA to implement a draft. I think the challenge, because I think MLB itself probably would want a draft. It makes things straightforward for them. I think there may be some resistance from the PA, because right now, okay, in US the drafts exist and there's not much you can do about it. But right now the player has the flexibility to choose a team of their liking as well. Now, I mean, there's a lot of so I think one thing is clear that both parties agree that something needs to happen. The thing is that both parties don't agree on the same thing, because I don't think PA wants a draft. PA wants a different solution, where the player has the flexibility to sign with the team they want. But right now, as things stand today, kids are subject to a lot of manipulation, right? There's a lot of deals under the table agreed upon, like handshake deals. I mean, as soon as it's like hockey, or like, like day one, you sign a contract. Like, you have a very complicated contract in hockey that you sign first day of free agency in 1 hour, and it's like, wow, you guys came to an agreement.
Yeah, I understand reforming it, but if these guys, if these fuckers end up just reforming it, just like, all right, starting in 2023, we're doing a draft. All you're going to do is just make owners richer, and you're going to lose the Latin American element. You're going to kill Latin America. You're going to lose so many Latin Americans. I hope the PA is smart enough to realize. I hope there are enough prominent Latin American players in there who will say, like, hey, you can't do this. Like, you're going to kill it. You're going to kill baseball globally.
Honestly, I think the spending limits have to go away. But then the other challenge is, okay, in Dominican it works. For Cuban players, it's a bit different then, still.
Yeah. What about the Nicaraguan players?
There aren't a lot.
Right?
Venezuela, I mean, a lot of teams are deliberately not scouting in Venezuela because it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of teams are saying, like, for the safety of their staff, they're not sending guys down. So it's Dominican is where it's all at, and Cuba, and you'll get the like Mexico. You'll see Central America.
I mean, Mexico, you have a lot of presence.
Yeah, and then there are some Central American countries that will provide some guys too.
But it's funny. I was just listening to the R.A. Dickey book, and he was talking about the 96 Olympics, and who did they play in the bronze medal game? It was U.S. against Nicaragua, and I think that was probably the falling off point of Nicaraguan baseball, because I remember growing up as a kid, Nicaragua was always competing in things, and it just, like, I don't know if it was the money or kids started to go towards soccer, but you just don't see Nicaraguan prospects anymore. Like, there's the odd one, like Loizaga, but I mean, there aren't very many.
So what happened?
I don't know. I've asked my dad this before, and I'm not sure if he's too aware, because he's not there anymore, obviously. But, like, I honestly think soccer has become a lot bigger, and I think their program is slightly improved. But I don't know if it's a government thing. I honestly don't know. But it would be interesting to find out, because, like, it is honestly a baseball hungry nation. That was their sport. I don't know if it still is, but that was their sport.
Maybe we can bring someone to talk about it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Or just if anybody is watching this, somehow finds this, maybe I'll chop this one up into a smaller video. But if somebody wants to come on and talk about Latin American baseball, I tried to look for Latin American baseball books, couldn't find a whole lot, but it would be awesome.
Nobody wants to talk. Nobody's going to talk about it.
They don't want to ruin it, man.
It's covert. There's so much, like, behind, like, handshake deals and money and under the table. Nobody can talk about. Nobody wants to disclose what goes on.
I like this though. Like, we did the Negro League baseball episode. What was it, 2 years ago? So just to plug that.
Yeah, actually, because this is the Black History Month, I was actually going to say that. So thank you for bringing that up, Ron. So we would definitely recommend our viewers to go and check that episode out. It's actually really good. Even if you're not into baseball, just the history, these are the situations where the socioeconomic factors and how society was organized back then you learn a lot about different things, and it's it was very eye opening for us.
And actually, we did get the names of a couple people who could probably come on for an episode about Latin American baseball, probably more from a historical perspective, but maybe they can give us some like more current stuff. So maybe that's a good idea for a next episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
In baseball, probably more from a All right, so I think that's a good place to end it off. We're at an hour and 10 minutes. I think we thought this was going to be like 40, 50 minutes, and we ended up talking a whole lot about baseball. But any last thoughts before we go?
No, we should do this more often.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we always have our little break where we do like I can't believe it's been 3 months, but I mean, yeah, I'm definitely up for it.
I am too, but maybe at not when I'm this tired. I'm going to bed.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll be back next week. If not, just follow us on Twitter. We'll let you know when there's a new episode. You can listen to our podcast as well. And just hit us up if there's anything you want to hear us talk about or any questions you have. By all means, definitely hit us up. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.